A few weeks ago, I turned 18, and as a gift, my father gifted me a car. It wasn't new. Actually, it was the car I was already driving everywhere, but during my party, he officially announced that it would be mine, and I wouldn't need to ask permission whenever I wanted to use it. To celebrate, I decided to take a trip up to some of my family who lived in the mountains, around the Appalachians. A 4-hour drive to get there, staying a few days, then the 4-hour trip back. This would be my first time driving for that long in one sitting, even longer alone. I left and arrived at my grandfather's house, where I would be staying during my visit, and where my cousin, to whom I happened to share a close bond, also lived. The first few days were all right. I got to look at a bunch of heirlooms around the house and hear stories from my grandfather and cousin that had more detail than the versions I had heard before, though whether they were added due to my age or my lack of parents was beyond me. About 4 days into my trip, there was a family dinner, 2 of my uncles, a couple of cousins, and the applicable significant others for any of those stated who had gathered around my grandfather's table. It was there that, due to my newfound adulthood, I elected to make some choice announcements. I had a feeling that with their culture and where they lived, something may have gone wrong, but I hoped that just maybe, they'd love me enough to look past it, even after the screaming. The look my grandfather gave me as I turned in for the night told me I was wrong. Texting with my cousin, he tried to console me, but I was beyond any kind of forgiveness or being the bigger person by this point. I told him what I had already decided the moment my uncles looked at me like a new person wearing his nephew's skin. I was going home the next day, not telling anyone, so as not stir the pot more than it already had been. I knew the rage my father would fly into if he heard even half the things his brother said about me, so I didn't want to deal with it. They'd hear about it, that I was sure of, but not from me, not until I was already home. Taking the half-neatly packed, half-stuffed full duffel bag I came with, I got back in my car and started the drive home as the pink light of sunrise broke way. Driving east most of the way, I was able to watch it come. I felt my negative emotions be swept by the overwhelming beauty, and I smiled to myself through the windshield for the first time since the night before. My smile was quickly jaded by the sound of a loud mechanical bang and the whistle of my car being forced to slow, as if almost all parts wanted to continue, but some weak link had decided this was not to pass. I used the last of its momentum to softly drift onto the wide and forgiving shoulder. Despite having driven for over an hour, I was still in mountain country. The road surrounded on all sides by thick pine forests that acted as a thick mist, blocking all view from anything beyond 10 feet or more from the road. In a fit of quiet and almost self-directed rage, I let the full weight of my head smack against the steering wheel as I effortlessly sighed a strong enough breath as to remove all the air in my lungs in a single, long, loud, downright pained groan of annoyance. "This cannot be fucking happening right now," I whispered to myself, before repeating the same sigh after a deep, inward breath. My mind wandered as I almost dissociated from the moment to settle myself, planning to return to a calm state of mind after a second of being somewhere else. I was shocked back to the present by a light rap on the window. With muscles that moved like friction stone blocks, I turned my head to look toward the sound, as I saw a plain-looking man standing just outside my window. We stared a moment at each other, mine a face of dejection, Sarah McLachlan playing somewhere in the back of my mind, and his of pleasured contentment, a warm smile decorating it, before I took the initiative and rolled my window just enough to procure a pleasant conversation. "Hello," I said, taking the lead, as he clearly did not want to begin the conversation. "Breakdown?" he replied, cocking his head with an almost simple curiosity. "Yeah, on the way home from relatives, heard a bang, then not much else but the engine going, but nothing else following it." I gripped my temples to fight off the raging migraine this situation was bound to grant me. "Want a ride into town?" His smile was unwavering. For some reason, in the back of my mind, its warmth gave in to some lack of sincerity. "Sure, yeah, let me just..." My words trailed off as I looked into the rear view to search for his vehicle, only to find the space behind mine to be blank. All right, just hop out and I'll get you taken care of. His smile became so wide, it forced his eyes into half-open slits. Where's your car? I said, trying to use it as a litmus test to check his safety, but still being concerningly unable to find it. I'll show you. Just come on out. His look remained unchanged through his words. We both kept still until the silence was broken by his flat palm slapping against the roof of the car. Well, alrighty then. He began to turn, walking with his back to my view as I watched him move his way slowly down the road through my rearview mirror. The inside of my head smarted with the twinge of a stress headache, causing me to lean down to rub my eyes and break my stare at the man. Within the moment I looked down and looked back up, the man had disappeared. I elected not to get out of my car and kept the doors locked. The thought of calling my parents crossed my mind, but despite that thought, I still didn't want to address why I was leaving early. I was still days away from when I was supposed to come home, so instead I tried to search on my phone, looking for the closest garage to get my car towed to. It took minutes just to load the page. The data out in the woods is almost non-existent. I found a garage that offered a towing service and called them. After a minute of talking and sharing my location as best I could describe it, the person on the other end said the truck would arrive in around half an hour. I sat and waited, doing my best to remain off my phone in case I'd need to call anyone else. I tried and failed to entertain myself for around 10 minutes before the roaring sound of a loud engine began barreling down the road to my back. That was fast, I thought to myself, at the time relieved. The truck parked behind mine, pulling smoothly onto the shoulder in a way that gave me confidence in the driver's experience, as the task seemed to have been completed effortlessly. Stepping out was a man in his mid to late 40s, dressed and carrying himself in a way stereotypical of someone working his job in this region of the country. He worked his way to me methodically, looking around my car, running fingers across the various parts, pushing against individual panels, tugging lightly at the doors around and the trunk, checking the ins and outs of the car's outer shell before coming to the window. "You doing all right, sir?" His voice was monotone and disinterested. "Yeah, I'm all right. Car went down. I just want to get home as soon as possible, huh?" I tried to continue speaking, but he went forward toward the front of the car, mid-sentence. "You didn't see some random guy on the road, did you?" He didn't respond, staring deathly at the hood. We sat there a moment. His eyes were blank, his face slack, and his body hanging loose like it was suspended in place. He was probably high, but I really needed this car fixed so I could go home. "Pop the hood," he said in a single calculated breath that seemed only large enough to utter his words and nothing more. "Oh, all right." I went to search around. I always forgot where my hood latch was in the car, because it wasn't labeled and was with a bunch of other latches and buttons on the left side next to my door. He looked up and watched me struggle, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Want some help?" he asked. "No, I'm all right. I just need a second to find it," I replied, looking up for a moment. I saw him. He had moved quickly since I had last taken my eyes off of him from the front to right next to my door. "Why don't you open the door and I'll pop it for you? I know where the latch is." His hand rested idly near the handle, almost in anticipation. No, it's fine if you know. Can you just tell me, and I can do it?" I looked back down at him. "Just open the door, and I'll get it." His voice's emotion, or lack thereof, remained unchanged. "No, it's okay." I was cut off. "Just open the door." Despite his tone not changing, I could feel the ambience shift as his hand moved to the door handle. I moved my hand from its place and stared up at him. It was only as my gaze lingered on his face for that long moment that I realized. I don't think I ever saw him taking a breath, but to speak. And now sitting in silence, his chest sat unmoving. His eyes were wet, appearing, but further prodding by my gaze revealed something more glassy. "What garage did you come from again?" "The one in town." My eyes almost crossed at his words. My family's town, the closest one to our current location, didn't have a garage. I had called one from the next town over. "Bryson?" I looked up at him, but he didn't reply. He just stood silently, as if I caught him in a lie, and he believed that by standing still, nothing would change. "Get away from my car," I said sternly but quietly, almost to myself. He stood limply only inches from the glass as he looked straight down into my eyes in some sort of attempt at a dominant stance. My heart began racing as, behind him, I saw the leaves of the foliage that sat at the side of the road wrestle, and a familiar face began making its way. I saw as the man from before came up to the road, walking smoothly to the side of the supposed mechanic and standing to his right, locking into the same death stare, as if one was taking my left eye and the other my right. I was frozen for the first few minutes, all three of us locked into this ritual of predation, until my discomfort in that current position became too great, and I bolted into the back seat, only to realize they did not move to meet my new location. Sitting for several more minutes as they stood, unmoving, unblinking, unbreathing. It was half an hour before my nerves had calmed enough for me to snatch my phone from the center console cup holder and dial the emergency line, trying my best to explain the situation, receiving some sort of confirmation I was awake and real in the dreamlike moment. "Okay, hang up and open for officers when they arrive," the woman on the phone said, though I still had more questions. "How long until—" I was cut off sharply by the sound of the call cutting off, figuring the awful lack signal in the mountains had cut it short. Thankful I had enough time to get my location to them. I sat and waited in the back seat as the figures continued to stand silently, my knees firmly pressed against my chest in a form of security comfort. It was nightfall when I began to fear that no one was coming. Sitting there, not unlike my observers, unmoving until some point around midnight, when exhaustion took hold. My blinks came longer and closer together. At some point my eyes shut, and I woke back up to the morning rays breaking in through the window and shining straight into my face. I blinked rapidly as my mind quickly adjusted. The sleep was dreamless, but my subconscious began trying to convince the rest of me that the events of yesterday were a dream. I wanted to believe it so bad that I jumped as I looked out the driver's side and saw the two still standing, still unmoved, still staring daggers into my driver's seat. I went to turn and lie down, shocking myself onto the back seat floor as beginning to rapidly hyperventilate as the sight of another face broke through my window, then another and another. Counting, it appeared during the night that 3 more had come and gathered around my car, standing, not quite next to each other, but clearly forming some sort of barrier circle around the vehicle. 3 faces I still didn't recognize, and 3 faces that continued to lack any emotion as they looked at where I was just lying to sleep, eyes unmoving even as I shifted. My stomach retched with hunger pains, and my head spun with dehydration as I rifled through my back seat for any form of sustenance, snatching a snack-sized bag of cheese puffs and putting the center seat down to grab a hot water bottle from the half-used pack I kept in the trunk, uncomfortably nursing off both as I tried to avoid my own reality, if only for long enough to sate my most primal needs, eyes focused entirely on the volume button of my radio, as to spare my gaze the oppressive reciprocation of the figures outside. As I finished my food and water, another feeling struck me. One I was silently praying would have been delayed until I could figure my situation out. I really needed to use the bathroom. I had never been more thankful for my car's broken state, as I used leftover clothes to block the windows and move one of the rugs in the back seat, revealing a small half-dollar-sized hole in the floor that had been there for some time, silently attempting to relieve myself, before quickly covering the hole back up and waiting a moment before removing the window covers. I looked back out at my observers only to see in horror that they had moved, if only slightly. The one closest to my gas cap had its gaze changed, now facing the floor under my car, on the side where the road leaned. I had to assume the leak must have trailed. Their face was still unchanged, but I felt a sinister idea somehow forming. I tried my best for the next few hours to remain calm, keeping my phone charged off my cigarette lighter port. Every hour or so, I would try again to reach various numbers. 911, the same garage I had called earlier. The situation had even devolved to the point where I called my parents, all my siblings, even my grandpa, cousins, and uncle, just hoping for any help at all, but nothing would go through. Not anymore. I had decided I would keep the covers on my windows in the back and lie down there for privacy as I tried to pass the time, hoping they would leave at some point, checking once every few hours, only to be disappointedly making eye contact with one of them, all continuing until nightfall. I tried to keep down and rest, and I was successfully dozing off when I was interrupted by a shock as the soft sound of a rapping against the window closest to my head. Silently and stupidly, I hoped it was someone real. They had not moved since arriving, so any change was enough to give me some kind of anticipation of help. Slowly peeling off the shirt that covered the window, which had stuck slickly to the window due to the humidity that formed from my sweat and breath, being slightly moist and making a squelching sound as I removed it, making eye contact with something. It was a man, or at least as man-looking as the others, but once again a new face, as the others that appeared the morning before. Standing dead still, bent over with eyes peering gray and dead somehow straight into mine as I moved the cover. A subtle, constant, consistent tap on the window accompanied his appearance as his finger smarted against the glass. He didn't look at me, instead feeling as though he was staring through me, at the window behind me, at the other window. Seeing the rhythm at which he tapped, I noticed a second tapping between his slow tapping. He would tap every 10 seconds, but I heard a tap every 5. I trembled as I shifted over to the other window, slowly removing its cover and shocking back in horror, as I saw a second man, in the same position and in the same action, slightly offset to create a consistent, evident, if not quiet, tapping sound. Their eyes were locked together in a line that somehow intersected almost exactly with the position I held while revealing the first. As I recovered the windows and tried to sleep, I felt a sense of overstimulation from the tapping. This tapping was something else. Every 5 seconds, that small but over-encumberingly discordant melody filled my thoughts. I tried to lie quietly, but as the sound tap-tap-tapped, I found myself driven to a headache as I wrapped extra clothes suffocatingly tight around my head to drown it out. But no matter how much I covered, that sound would pierce through. I simply sat deathly, phasing my mind out of the car and into somewhere else as the tapping continued, and I stared at the lock on the front door, zoning out until suddenly it was morning, and I was lifting my head from the sleep. I felt the head sting of passing out and looked to the side, once more seeing the eyes of both men as they stood at either side. That sound still continuing. I felt an overwhelming sense of dread and disappointment as I found myself unable to hear anything but the sound, and I felt my hand drift. In a trance, I migrated to the front seat, my finger grazing the lock of the car, and in a moment, before I outthought my own drive, I hit the unlock, clicking. But only a moment later, I came back and locked the door once more, looking up and seeing that none of them had moved. Out of a deadly curiosity, my hand once again drifted. My finger pressed the unlock once more, and once again, nothing had changed. We all sat unmoving. The unlocking of the door seemed to have no effect on the disposition of my captors. Thinking back, even at the first encounter, how my doors were unlocked, and yet I was asked to open my door. I chuckled and broke into full laughter as I realized my position. "Oh my God, you can't open a fucking door?" I rolled on the back of the front seat, the only joy I had felt in days. It took only a few minutes for the elation to fade, and I was back in the same position. The fact that they could not open the door did something for my comfort, but it changed my position in no meaningful way. They were still surrounding me, whether the doors were locked or not. My thoughts were interrupted as a loud sound broke. The cocking of a gun shifted the eyes of the surrounders. "Enough of this," a gruff, unfeeling voice that felt as though it were trying to elicit some form of anger, as I saw a large man walking up to the car, clutching a shotgun. My heart raced as he began to come to the driver's side. I crawled to the passenger end. "Get out, now!" He came to the door, and all the men came to his side. I saw as he pointed his gun at the window, and I placed my hand on the passenger door. A deafening gunshot erupted, and my every thought went to opening the door, and yet my head snapped to look dumbly at the gun. I saw as the gun was smoking and continued to be pointed at the window unbroken. Looking out of my window, I saw the woods, and as light glinted and the sun rose, eyes peered at me, seeing this trap. I took my hand off the door and sat down to calm my heart. The man with the gun stood in that same position, unmoving. Locked in my previous condition and feeling nothing but tiredness as fear subsided, I fell asleep in the midday sun. Waking up hours later as the sun began to set, a darkness had overtaken the car. I thought it had become night as I took my phone and showed the light, only to see cloth against the window next to me, and the window next to that one, and the window next to that. In horror, the realization dawned on me that they were surrounding the car, fully, unbroken, so completely that only the smallest slivers of light made it through, and nothing was visible. I replaced my dread with the feeling of once again needing to use the restroom. I carefully made my way to the back, using the light to guide my way and moving the carpet, but when feeling for the hole, I was confused as a smooth, unbroken surface met my fingertips. Shining the light down, I looked in confusion as I saw a brownish, orangish plug of sap and mud where the hole once was. It had clearly been there for hours. In that second, my mind had also made me aware of the possibility that they were still under my car. With nothing else to keep myself occupied, I sat and waited. I couldn't tell you how long had passed. I was sparing with the use of my phone, only turning it on for brief moments to remember how light looked in the darkness or to check the time and date. I would sit and check the time. Sometimes 2 hours would pass, sometimes 3, 4, 6, 12 entire days, sometimes only a few minutes. I nursed off bottles and any random snacks around the car. My sense of time and circadian rhythm had been so thoroughly thrown off that I would jump between feelings of complete satisfaction with my sustenance to starving or thirsting, as if I had been drifting along for days without it. I have no idea how long I spent in that state. I stopped being able to trust the dates on my phone, or maybe with everything. My mind couldn't grapple with how few or how many days or weeks I had spent in there and lied to me as if to give my consciousness the comfort of knowing my own sanity. The car smelled like a rotting pile. I had been relieving myself in bottles and bags, putting them into the trunk to try and separate the awfulness from myself. Even if at some point the gesture became pointless, it still gave me the sensation of being human. I laid down in the back seat. I stared into the darkness, using my imagination to pretend as though I could see the roof of my car. That was when my daze was thoroughly snapped. For the first time in weeks, a loud rumbling sound came from up the road. I stayed unmoving until I began to hear bangs, and the first sunlight in so long broke through. I looked up. Another bang. This time I watched as one of the bodies fell from the window. I sat up like a rocket had been strapped to my back as another bang and another fall came. They were increasing in pace. It kept going as I migrated quickly to the driver's seat, looking out the window to watch as one of the figure's heads went halfway into mist before my eyes, as another, much louder bang came. They were getting closer. I began to laugh wildly as I watched them fall, exposing my eyes and skin to daylight. It stung, but the pain was the loveliest sensation I had felt in my entire life. The last of the figures fell, and I heard running footsteps approaching. Looking into the rearview mirror, I saw a large truck labeled SWAT, and one of several men rushing toward me. I was saved. The man reached my window, his face obscured by a half mask and some kind of goggles. He made it to the door. "Let's get you out of here, sir. We'll explain everything on the way." His hand bolted for the door handle. My hand went to the inside one, about to open at the same time to meet his, but then I stopped. I pulled my hand back in the same moment I moved it forward. "It's unlocked," I said. He stared back at me. I looked into the rear view, and all the other figures stood still, looking at me. "I don't know where I am. Please, someone come help me."